you posted this article on Twitter February 12th, and you said that it's probably the most important Bitcoin long form article that you've ever written because of its timing. Bitcoin's at a crossroads. So sounds like you think we need an influence upgrade. You're saying that we've largely won this environmental battle, but we're losing a new narrative war. And so what does the data show, and just the premise of the article, and then we'll get into it more specifically.
Yeah, great question. So a bit of background. I never saw myself as spending a whole lot of time fighting FUD about Bitcoin and the environment. But for me, before I did that, I spent a lot of time coaching people, coaching technology entrepreneurs, specifically working on them pitching for capital and then leading them through that journey. Before that, I had to pitch for capital myself and learn how to be a technology entrepreneur. And through that whole stage, I learned a lot through first principles about the importance of being able to reach your next group of adopters, whether that was investors or whether that was prospective customers, and about just technology adoption curves generally. And so for me, when I was stepping into the front line of fighting environmental FUD, it was a chance for me to take the field again. And rather than train other people, to do it myself. And so a lot of the principles I used, yes, there was a lot of data, there was a lot of analysis, but there was also, it required a lot of good framing, good storytelling, good use of analogies, making the complex simple, staying in rapport with people whilst challenging their perspectives. And that worked pretty well. And then at the start of this year, I asked myself, how can I have the biggest impact for Bitcoin? And the answer was not do more environmental FUD fighting. The answer was twofold. It was, number one, you're a coach, so coach other people to do that. And so I ran a seminar on that, and Swan's been kind enough to put it up on their channel, which is great. So that education reaches more people because it is something people can learn. And that gave me the freedom to really come back to what I do well, which is coaching other people. And specifically, I wrote a book on influence, on pitching, and I could see there was a gap. And the gap that I saw, and I'm not the only one who's seen it, a lot of people have started to see it, particularly in the bear market. We started to see some of the warning signs that this was going to happen, that as the OGs sold, we didn't have a new catalytic event. We didn't have a new cohort of buyers coming in. Mm-hmm. And it's not because the product's no good. We've got the best product in the world. So when people aren't buying, and it's not a problem with the product, what could it be? It could be the user interface. Maybe people find it too complicated to use somehow. That's possible, and that's always true. But also, we've got to look at the other aspect, which is the sales and marketing team. And we don't have a sales and marketing team, but on the other hand, we're all the sales and marketing team.
Yeah.
And when we look at how effective we've been at that, and particularly as Bitcoin reaches its next potential cohort of mainstream adopters, you can see that there's a lot of areas where we're falling short of what's needed, number one. And it's not just a skill set issue, it's also a mindset issue, where sometimes we pride ourselves in having great self-sovereignty and being high agency, but we haven't always been high agency in some of our responses, which is to blame the other person for not getting it. Or people don't get Bitcoin because they don't have high financial literacy. People don't get Bitcoin mining because they don't have good energy literacy. It's all too easy to blame the customer. But a business that blames the customer or the prospective customer actually goes out of business. The high agency response to say, how can I better reach this customer? Maybe the set of messages that led me to adopt Bitcoin are not what the next cohort needs. And that's becoming increasingly apparent. So us here on this call, we're not representative of the next wave of adopters. We're representative of the last wave of adopters, perhaps 2 waves ago. So whatever resonated with us and caused us to come to Bitcoin, it's highly unlikely. That's the message that we pass on. So there's a time where great introspection is required to ask, what is the message? What is the brand of Bitcoin? Are we doing a good job of representing that brand? And are we taking the right message? And do we have the right messengers to reach these next cohorts of adopters, whether that's retail, whether that's small business owners, whether that's sovereign wealth funds, whether that's charities, whether that's the boards of corporates, whether that's pension funds, bank owners. And not just as the message, but how are we engaging with them? Are we following the good tried and true principles of human engagement, which is you listen first, identify needs first, and only then open your mouth? Or are we going with a set idea of what we think they want to hear, and it's more lecture? Are we doing Bitcoin education, or are we doing Bitcoin evangelism?
Yep.
So these
you're
are some of
saying,
the questions that it's germane for us to be asking at this time.
yes. So you're saying the deep philosophical essays about Bitcoin and time, or comparing Bitcoin to mycelium, is not going to do the trick.
Those are great for a certain cohort of people. I'm never going to diss them.
Yeah.
It's like those are fantastic for certain types of people.
Yes.
And we all know that's not the majority of people. So
Right.
what else do we need in addition to that?
Yep. Good point.
So Daniel, I have to say two things quickly. One, just commend you on all the environmental FUD busting. I know you're focusing on a slightly different path here, which makes sense because you've done so much of it, but commend you on it because not only did you have the ability, but you had the patience to do it. I can't tell you how many of your pieces I read where I was just like, wow, he actually went through everything in so much detail. So good on you for doing that. And then number two, I was listening to you on Brandon Gentili's podcast recently, and you introduced a word that I had never heard before. Is it ambivert? Am I getting that right?
Correct.
Okay, that was phenomenal. You just made me think of it again because you were talking about how are we interacting with new people in Bitcoin. And I think that's where the context that you brought it up in. And I assume it means in between an introvert and an extrovert, or maybe taking some characteristics of each.
Yeah, it's better than that. Think of ambidextrous. Ambidextrous doesn't mean you use your left and your right hand together necessarily, but it means you're equally equipped at using either. So an ambivert is very comfortable playing the role of the introvert, which is great because it means they can introspect, they can self-reflect, they can listen. They don't have the need to speak up. But also they're capable within a conversation of playing the extrovert, of taking the lead, taking direction, challenging a perspective while staying in rapport. And so the people who we need in this next part of the journey are equally comfortable doing both.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I've always felt like introvert and extrovert were a little too mutually exclusive, or they're always pitched that way. So I heard that word and I was just like, oh, why have I not heard of that before? So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, I can kick it off. Let's go with, there was a Nakamoto project survey, and this is one that surveyed, if we get any of the details wrong, let me know, but 3,500 Americans, and that some of their entrenched beliefs, which were things listed as such as just general distrust or a perceived immorality or perceived uselessness, were their biggest barriers to Bitcoin ownership. And that was actually stronger than any demographic factor or political factor. So that seems pretty damning when you hear that. What do you think is the best way to try to combat some of those perceptions?
We have to look at how that perception arose. Where did that message come from? It certainly didn't come from, for the most part, Bitcoiners. Perhaps occasionally it might have come from some Bitcoiner behaving badly and riling people, but generally speaking, it hasn't. Generally speaking, this perception has come because that has been the story told by the enemies of Bitcoin. And they have done a superb job in branding Bitcoin. And we've made it easy for them by not providing a strong alternative brand that appeals to the next cohort of users. So into that gap has come the branding, which has come from those who do not necessarily want Bitcoin to succeed for a whole host of reasons. So when we look at some of the narratives, we're very familiar with them. Let's take, for example, the environmental narrative. Yes, it's true that mainstream media is reporting on that much better now. But that doesn't mean we've won the battle because, okay, in the last 2 years, we might have had 20 articles in the mainstream media about how good Bitcoin is for the environment, but we had 400 plus articles in the 4 years previous about how devastating it was for the environment.
Yeah.
And so I continually come up against this politician or this regulator or this policymaker or this ESG committee member who's saying, oh yeah, but Bitcoin's terrible for the environment, is it? And we can't blame them. It's because it's not the job of the newspapers to say, sorry guys, we got it wrong for the last 4 years. Mea culpa, here's the real story. Not going to happen. Nor is the news media going to say, hey, we know we told you that Bitcoin was mostly powered by fossil fuel, and that was true, but now it's mostly powered by sustainable. Not going to happen. It's not interesting news for them to tell. So most people's understanding is very out of date. So it's been created by those people who had a vested interest, who had access to a powerful PR machine, and they've done a very good job. Now, we can complain about that, or we can do something much more empowering, which is to learn from it. What would happen if we were to do the same? If we were to actually use the power of PR, the power of branding to better turn tell our story. We've had a great example of how not to do it from Coinbase. But what if we actually did it? What if we told an authentic story and did our equivalent of the 1984 Apple campaign, right? So how could we better brand Bitcoin is a story which we've got to ask ourselves. We look at the state of reality and how things are and how people perceive Bitcoin, the neuro associations that people are making, either with the Trump family or Jeffrey Epstein has been the latest one. And it's just all too easy. You don't have to have arguments. You don't have to have data. All you need to do is tell a message repeatedly, and then it'll become the norm. Why don't we repeatedly tell the message, which is going to resonate with a mainstream audience, about Bitcoin's genuine virtues, which are anchored in truth? And it's not necessarily that it's freedom money. It's not necessarily that it fights currency debasement. It's not necessarily tying it to a set of libertarian values that may or may not be things that brought us to Bitcoin, but it's understanding that we've got to meet people where they're at. And if they don't know what the problem is that Bitcoin solves, then starting with telling them how Bitcoin fights currency debasement when they don't know the problem in the first place, and for them to accept that framing of Bitcoin as a solution they didn't know there was a problem too, is asking them to take on a lot very suddenly. It's a high cognitive bandwidth for them to take on. And sometimes it's scary because it requires them to admit that some fundamental things they thought were not broken about the world are actually broken. A lot of people just don't want to believe that. So what's an easier, simpler message that we can give them that will resonate with them today? Whether that's a sovereign fund, whether that's a sovereign nation, whether that's a pension fund, or whether that's a retail adopter of Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue actually into the next question I had for you, which is you lay out the hierarchy of needs in the article. And so obviously we need to create some new messages. You talk about how we might do that. What's a guide for us to do that? And we want to give this kind of self-actualization talk to a starving person, right? Is one of the examples you use. So what does safety, quoting quoting a word that you use of these kind of hierarchy of newcomer needs. So what does safety actually look like for a person in a running a pension fund? Or care, what does care look like for someone in a corporate boardroom?
I'm going to use an example of some people who are doing an extraordinary job of this already. So this is people like Sam Roberts, who orange-pilled UK's first pension fund and also the first pension fund in the world to do a 3% allocation to Bitcoin. People like Ismail, who is the CEO of Evergive, and they're the first organization in the world who's made it possible for charities to be able to accept Bitcoin in large volumes. These are the sorts of people who are already doing it. So we can look at the examples of what's already working. And what these people do is, firstly, they make sure that the person knows that they're not going to be told off or made to feel like they're a fool or ignorant by voicing their opinions or voicing their viewpoints about Bitcoin. So they need to know that they're safe to do that. And we may not agree with them, but we can at least empathize and say, look, I understand why you said that, rather than what a fool, why could you say that? No, you're wrong. Big difference. When someone says to me something which is untrue, such as Bitcoin's an environmental disaster, it uses too much energy, I would typically say, I understand why you say that. And then I'll just pause. Now, why would I do that? Now, I don't agree with them, but I absolutely honor that person's right to hold that position. And I do understand why they say that, because they've been drinking from the poison well of the media. So I have complete empathy for that position. That creates safety. That gives a person a signal. You can voice your objections. Now, if they don't feel safe, they're still going to have objections, but they're going to be thought bubbles, not speech bubbles. And if they're thought bubbles, not speech bubbles, then we can't have a dialogue, and I can't help to turn that person's perspective from a one which is based on unsound data to one which is based on sound data.
Yeah.
The second thing in terms of caring is often we care more about converting the other person than we do about the other person. That's not care. Care means you are unattached to what the result of your conversation about Bitcoin is. Obviously, you would like that the person adopted it and used it because you know that's going to benefit them, but you're not attached. You realize this person has agency just like you do, and that's their personal decision, that they have sovereignty too. And part of sovereignty means that you cannot impose your will upon another person. So you respect their right to take what you say in whatever form and do what they want with it. And maybe they'll adopt Bitcoin. Maybe it'll take 3 conversations before they do. But giving them that care, that you care more for them than you do about your personal agenda. So that's care. And then alignment. People very seldom will change their perspective if they don't feel that there's a strong alignment of values and they don't like you as a person, but they don't feel that in some way you have a tribe that you share which is in common. So what could that tribe be? When I'm talking to environmentalists, that's relatively easy because I am an environmentalist. When I'm talking to a pension fund, I might have to explore a little bit more what tribe that we're both part of because it's not immediately obvious. And it may be the tribe that we're both investors. We both run funds, even though the fund I run is very different. It's a technology fund and theirs is a pension fund. But we are familiar with fiduciary duty. We're familiar with due diligence. We're familiar with going through a process before making a decision to adopt a new technology. So in that sense, we're part of the same tribe, and I can have empathy for the fact they've got a process to go through. I can't expect to have a single conversation and they adopt Bitcoin. I also understand that it's not enough, and this is where we make the mistake a lot of the time. We think the answer is to go in and say Bitcoin is digital credit, Bitcoin is digital capital, Bitcoin will suck the monetary premium out of other assets. People already know that, or they don't know about it, but they don't care about it. In most cases with a lot of these funds, they actually would like to have an excuse to be able to take Bitcoin on because they understand its performance has been very good over the last 10 years relative to all other asset classes. So we don't need to tell them about how well it can perform, nor do we need to give them a visionary message about the future of currency because that sounds so far removed from their mandate to get wholesale returns in the next 5 years. That sounds far-reaching. It doesn't sound well anchored to what's immediately important. The issues they have are much more mundane. It's how do I custody it? What's the social proof? Are my peers in the industry using it? Will I get whacked, metaphorically, if I adopt Bitcoin? Will I be criticized? Will I get scrutiny from my wholesale investors? Will someone say that it's a bad fit in terms of ESG? Of course, a lot of funds care about that. And what's the technical complexity? Will there be a high burden of understanding to take on a new asset? These are the questions that they have. And so they need to get a sense that, again, they're not talking to someone who's lecturing at them, but someone who has the archetype of a diplomat or a negotiator who's prepared to walk them through a process, ask questions, and attune Bitcoin to saying, here's how it'll work through your process. And again, I'm going to use Sam Roberts as an example of someone who's done this. This is not theory. This is exactly what he did to get the world's first pension fund to give a 3% allocation to Bitcoin. Number one, he understood intimately the decision-making process of a pension fund, so he's able to speak to that. He was a member of that tribe. And number two, he did a lot of listening. So just because he knew about pension funds, it didn't mean he knew about the process of that specific pension fund. So he asked a lot of questions. He asked about when does it mature? When does it go to the insurer? He was also detached, and he cared more about the person in front of him than he did about Bitcoin. And what was the evidence of that? Because he said, hey, Bitcoin may not be right for you. Why might it not be right? Because if their fund matures in 2 years, they could be caught at the wrong part of the cycle, and it's not the right decision for them. But if they mature in 10 years, or 8 years, or even 6 years, then it's highly likely that it is the right decision for them. So he's able to ask questions which showed he cared more about the returns and meeting the fiduciary mandates of that investment company than evangelizing Bitcoin. That earns a lot of trust, that level of non-attachment to outcome. And then he was able to model different scenarios based on 1%, 2%, 3% allocation, based on different scenarios, including Bitcoin going to zero. And what he was able to show that if Bitcoin went to zero, it would take them a few more months to meet their return requirements to wholesale investor. But if Bitcoin did what we expected it to do, then they'd meet that requirement 2 years early. And that was what allowed them to make that decision. It was less visionary communication about Bitcoin as the future of sound money or digital capital or digital credit, more the ability to walk them through a process and tailor the communication to the person in front of them. And so again, I'm using pension funds as an example, but you could equally say small business owner, retail adopter of Bitcoin, person in the streets, right? Sovereign nation, exactly the same process as what is required. That archetype of the patient diplomat and the ambassador for Bitcoin who can listen, who can walk through a process, and who can tailor the communication to where the person's at and what they care about.
Swan Bitcoin, obviously the producer of this show. I am a co-founder at Swan, and we help people invest in Bitcoin and build generational wealth. Together, we build strong relationships with our clients. That's really our bread and butter, is getting to know you as a person and helping you develop a long-term strategy to grow your Bitcoin wealth and to pass it down over generations. And we would love to have you as part of the Swan family. So check us out at swan.com/SSL for Swan Signal Live. And we'll talk to you then. You can meet the team.